Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, here we are. In the first day of 2017, somehow we managed to survive that turbulent year that is fast vanishing in the rearview mirror. Yet, the flight path ahead looks turbulent at best. I say this because we see that the president-elect is continuing to show a great deal of admiration for Vladimir Putin. It's as though Trump honestly believes that Putin is someone who has America's best interests at heart. Of course, that's all just a bit baffling to me. As we all know, Putin got his start with the old Soviet intelligence agency, the KGB. Their entire purpose was to thwart the West and spread the ideals of communism and socialism across the globe. Thus, I do find the approach of a great many self-professed conservatives with Putin bizarre, to say the least. It's as though they are willing to throw their values and traditions to the wayside, and that there's a sense of emotional euphoria when they discuss him. As with Trump, they seemingly just cast aside all the values and traditions they've championed for years to stop and woo for a man who has fought those same values and traditions his entire life. I can't say this is merely the seduction of victory. No, there's something far more sinister in the woodwork here, folks. It would appear that there are a great many souls in these United States who have become enamored with notions of authoritarianism and are perfectly willing to abandon the natural law tenets that underpin our entire system of polity. I can honestly say that this trend both disturbs and alarms me. What is unfurling before us is a clear and present danger to our standard of living and our traditional philosophy. I'm sure that some of you may think I'm being a bit melodramatic here, or that I'm overreacting to something that isn't that important. Yet, some of you are the same voices who tell us that we shouldn't worry about Trump, that we should be wary but hopeful. Reagan's old phrase was that we should trust but verify. What I see with the current trajectory of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, is that there is not so much trust but hero worship, and not so much verification but demagoguery. Is this literally what our movement and philosophy has devolved into? Have we no respect for ourselves and our fellow sovereigns? When we disregard the truth for some misguided sense of political expediency, we abandon all sense of pride and self-worth. Now, it is true that vainglory as pride comes before the fall, but self-respect is healthy. After all, the two fundamental pillars upon which our entire culture and government is based are that of self-respect and self-accountability, working in tandem to give us self-determination. We used to live by this notion. Hell, we used to try and promote this line of thinking around the globe. But now? What now? Now we sit there and woo over the efforts of a despotic tyrant half a world away. and our president-elect goes on about some sort of super-secret evidence that our intelligence agencies don't have that throws doubt on the Russian hacking scandal. Look, you all know we don't like Obama or the Democrats here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. For any of you who've listened to our program over the past year and 4 months, you know perfectly where we stand with regards to the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist. That being stated, we also don't like it when the president-elect attempts to showboat, using matters of national security as the bait and switch. Honestly, folks, it feels as though Trump is treating this entire situation as if it was one of the episodes of The Apprentice. But this is our nation we're talking about here. This is our own safety and our well-being that we're discussing. None of that seems to cross the president-elect's mind. He only cares about his own branding value, or at least that's the perception that I'm getting from all of this. I suppose crazier things have happened in our relatively brief yet illustrious history, but I can't quite think of anything at the moment. I think it's just some sort of a sick and twisted game to him. And my biggest fear is that good and decent Americans will suffer as a direct result of his chicanery. Yet, it cannot be said that we haven't been warning of and about this. The entire Never Trump movement did everything within its power to point out how his reckless affinity for Russia could put our entire national security in jeopardy. We can ill afford to ignore the grave dangers that this presents us as a nation and people. The truth is, we must be wary of our own president-elect as well as the Russian autocrat. I do believe the friendship between Trump and Vladimir Putin will be short-lived. At some point, Vladdy is going to stomp upon Trump's bigly and fragile ego. And as far as Trump is concerned, such stomping is nothing short of a crime against humanity. Oh, the humanity of it. Now, how can I say that with such boldness, with such clarity of purpose? I can already hear the shrill voices of the accusatory Trumpidian tabernacle attacking me for being some sort of a clairvoyant or some such nonsense. I can say it because it's already out there, clear as day to be seen. The problem is that too many of us have become willfully blind to the truth that's out there. We have closed our eyes to the reality that surrounds us because we don't want to see what we've done and what is going to happen. We have become so desperate for victory that we've shut down our mental faculties and capabilities. It's sad, but it's undeniably true. Folks, I can't think of something potentially more devastating for our nation than a rehash of the Cold War. Indeed, the Cold War was an expensive and drawn-out period of fear and uncertainty. Of course, our economy wasn't in such abysmal shape during the Cold War years as it is now. We're not the industrial powerhouse that we had been during those years either. To enter into a second Cold War as we are now would be an exceedingly unwise decision. Despite this, the blame cannot be placed entirely at Trump's feet. Obama is busily using his final days in office to further weaken America's position, both at home and abroad. He is using this opportunity as a last chance to stick his thumb in the eye of the nation he both loathes and despises. That's just who he is and who he has always been. It's been his goal from the start to weaken America. In a sense, he views this as putting America in her proper place. That's the problem with the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. They are always so keen to blame America first. They always point to America as being the root of all the evil in the world or of all the world's problems. Even with the ridiculous hoax known as man-made global warming, they point to America as leading the charge to drown penguins and turn the coast into a new ocean. Of course, the most laughable aspect of this is that they assert that it is scientifically based. But absolutely nothing could be further from the truth than such outlandish and juvenile claims. This is the madness that greets us on the first day of the new year. It's not some rationed position of stability we find ourselves in. Rather, we awaken to some chaotic whirlwind of a situation that seems to be stripped directly from the pages of some 2-bit comic book. Throughout it all, the recurring theme that seems to rise to the surface is that we lack any solid backing for our future. We grope around blindly, looking for what it was that made us strong, resolute, and bold in the first place. How did we wind up here? What has happened to the indomitable American spirit? The answer to this rather rhetorical question should be both open and obvious. We've abandoned the principles that have guided us for over 2 centuries. In a sense, we've turned away from the birthright that rightly belongs to us in our capacity as American citizens, yet no one wants to admit it. We're too afraid of the consequences of admitting that we've been led astray by these forces that have no interest in our well-being whatsoever. Sadly, the onus of this debacle is ours. It is ours because we allowed this nightmare scenario to come to fruition. Sure, those political elitists who champion such drivel are partly to blame, but just partly. They could have never gotten as far as they did without the tacit support of we the people. And as we've always said here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, we must be willing to hold ourselves accountable for our own words, deeds, and actions if we ever hope to restore America to prosperity. And unfortunately, we see that the reactions that have come to the epicenter time and again, particularly with the way that Trump handles himself on social media, is not panning out in a way that works in our best interest. It is not shaping out to be what would make this nation robust or strong again. And yet we know that they continue to cling to that hollow, shallow, empty, and meaningless platitude that constituted their campaign slogan throughout the disastrous debacle known as the 2016 presidential election cycle of Make America Great Again, or as they have ridiculously shortened it to now, MAGA. But MAGA for what? How? Again, the shills have not explained, nor have they gone into detail as to how they will propel this nation back to prosperity. It's because they haven't thought about it. It's because they don't really believe it. You know, the truth can be difficult to swallow sometimes, but it must be accepted. Once we realize that we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, have such significant power that then, and only then, can we begin the difficult process of restoring our nation. Yet the restoration of our constitutional republic requires a certain finesse that I think President-elect Trump lacks. His campaign often touted him as the wrecking ball. But folks, as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, we don't need a wrecking ball. We need skilled craftsmen, known as statesmen, to help guide America back to the proper path of governance. And you see, part of the problem that kept rehashing itself all throughout the 2016 election was that neither of the political parties, the mainstay 2 parties that have always led us to erroneously believe that there is but a binary choice, were advocating for the Constitution. Neither one of them were saying that the Constitution is what we have to get back to, that the Constitution in and of itself is the keys that will unlock the chains and shackles that have been impeding the American people for generation after successive generation now. And when you stop and think about it in an objective fashion and examine it through the constitutional lens and framework, you see that this is a daunting and troubling problem that should be sounding off the alarm bells and sending up red flags for decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens all throughout this great land. You know, Trump's response to this entire Russian debacle gives me little reason to hope. One of my dear friends, who full-throatedly supports Donald Trump, says that I must have hope. And for the life of me, I've tried. I've tried to look at this from a positive point of view. I've tried to just willy-nilly accept Trump for what he is, and to think that maybe he won't be so bad. But then Trump goes out in front of the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and assumes the position of being Donald Trump again. He goes out and he shows that he lacks any modicum of restraint. He shows that he is thin-skinned, petty, childish, and juvenile. And none of these are characteristics which I think bode well for the looming 4 years that are ahead of us. None of it lets me rest well at night thinking that this is the statesman that can help America regain her footing in the geopolitical sphere. Because when he heads to the Twitter sphere and he uses those stubby thumbs of his to continue to just throw out excrement and filth, it is not a good image. It is not a proper reflection of the true heritage, character, spirit, but above all national identity of the United States of America and her people. Unfortunately, it seems that we are not considering this. It seems that this doesn't enter into the foray at all, that we have become trapped within the quagmire of a cult of personality, which is something that we used to lambast the left for, particularly during the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. We have essentially become the very sort of thing that we claim to be fighting against, and that is also troubling, alarming, and disconcerting. But we have to get back to a modicum of sanity. We have to get back to understanding what is happening here. And for that reason, I don't have hope. What I am attempting to do here is to verify that Trump will act with restraint, as is required by the limited nature of the federal government as it is designed within the clear and concise language of our Constitution. And try as I may, no such verification is available. The man continues to tap dance to a consistently inconsistent beat like a drunken sailor on shore leave. It's not a confidence-building scenario that we're facing right now. With each day, he seems to make an even bigger fool of himself than he did the day before. Unfortunately, that is the reality we face as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you. Meanwhile, we see that Sarah Palin is attempting to restore her tarnished image by demanding that Trump have us leave the UN. Yes, it would be a fantastic thing to see the United States make her departure from that reprehensible institution. It would be a marvelous thing to see another socialist institution suffer a staggering blow. But Trump won't commit to something like that. He's all about utilizing the power of government and is distrustful of the magnificent ingenuity of the individual popular sovereigns themselves. Think back to the position that he assumed with respect to the federal land grab that exists in our westernmost states, where about 90% of the land there is held in perpetuity by the federal government. He said that he wants those lands to be great, and the only way that he can foresee those lands remaining great and to not have their natural beauty tarnished is to keep them firmly entrenched in the hands of the federal government. Folks, that is not a conservative position. That is not a position which lines up with the Constitution, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is commonly referred to as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our Constitution itself. And that, just to me, speaks volumes about the great litany and plethora of problems that are facing us currently. But, as I said, this is just the way Trump has been for the vast majority of his 70 years spent on God's green earth. I think it would be foolish to think that he would somehow miraculously depart from his deeply held positions that he has espoused all throughout his adult life. Folks, we've said all along that the way to place America back on track is to embrace those aspects of our culture that made us great in the first place. We must now think of the government not as a great friend, or not as the end-all, be-all solution to the litany of problems facing us, because that would lead us down a further path of decay, greater disruption, greater disunity, and, of course, greater destruction. Unfortunately, that appears to be the position that a majority of Americans have taken, turning to the government as the end-all, be-all solution. And it is going to work to our great detriment. There's really no way around this harsh yet simple fact of reality, unless and until we are willing to cure ourselves of this addiction to overzealous government. We cannot possibly hope to restore American prosperity. Now, I know it may seem as though the message that I'm conveying here on today's Solo Flight Special Edition of our state-of-the-art radio program is a bunch of negativity, is a bunch of fear-mongering, is perhaps detached from reality, and I should probably just get over this. But I am not willing to get over the fact that we are not returning to the Constitution. I am not willing to get over the fact that the very problems we have encountered, the very things that we have claimed to stand in staunch opposition against, are the very sorts of tactics and strategies that we are now embracing as we turn to a cult of personality. Because when we stop and think about that in a logical and rational fashion, we begin to fully realize that that is nothing short of sheer and unadulterated hypocrisy. And I don't remember when it became cool to become a hypocrite. It's not wise to become hip with hypocrisy. That's just counterintuitive. It goes against all that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. Yet we need to get back to a modicum of sanity. We need to reignite the great, rugged, individualistic spirit that has been one of the defining characteristics of the United States of America, both as a nation and people, for generation after successive generation. But that is going to require a concerted and diligent effort on our part in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States of America. And I know that that is far easier said than done, but done it must be. We simply do not have a choice in the matter. This is something that we must strive to do. This is something that is our duty, obligation, but above all, responsibility to see through. No other person can do that. No other entity, no other force on earth is endowed with the authority, the power, or the wherewithal to do that. Because when you look at the very design of our federalist constitutional republic, you will see that the language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution provides no other alternative. It's because our founding fathers expected us to be self-accountable and self-responsible. They expected us to embrace self-reliance and to overcome all the hurdles, obstacles, and adversities that would appear in our path. You see, that's what it means to be free. That's what it means to think and to act for yourself. But unfortunately, it appears as though we are doing everything within our power to reject that, to ignore that, to disregard that in every shape, form, and facet that is available. And I think again that this works to our great detriment. We have to be cognizant and aware of the dangers that face us. And as my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, has so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, without our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself, we are absolutely left with nothing. Stop and think about that for a moment. Do we really want to live a life on our knees in servitude to the government? Or do we want to assume our proper position as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty and as the forebearers of this great representative republic, which happens to be the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutionally endowed republic in the entire course of human events or world history? I think the answer to that is quite clear. I think that the great weight of the evidence fully demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that we should embrace the greater aspects of ourselves, those things that made us robust and powerful, those things that made us the leaders of the free world. But when you look at the current state of political affairs, and when you look at the way that both sides of the political aisle are clamoring for some sort of centralized governmental takeover of power and authority, further demeaning, further belittling, further diminishing the role, capacity, and responsibilities of we the people, we see that this stands in stark and direct contradictory terms to the very foundational image that our founding fathers had conjured up at the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. And again, this is just one of those simple truths and facts of life that cannot be ignored. But we see that those who have embraced this notion of a cult of personality, irrespective of whether that cult of personality was that of outgoing President Barack Hussein Obama or incoming President-elect Donald J. Trump, they are deluding themselves. They are convincing themselves that these messianic figures will come down from providence above and somehow with the magic sweep of a hand or the drop of a wand or the stroke of a pen make everything hunky-dory again. It'll be all sunshine, rainbow farts, and unicorns all over again. Except that that never works. And if you stop and think that something sounds too good to be true, 9 times out of 10, it is far too good to be true. There's nothing wrong with hope, as my full-throated Trump-supporting friend would say, having hope, but misplaced hope. Placing hope behind something that lacks any and all substance, that is reckless, that is dangerous, that is foolhardy, and that is going to lead to disappointment and the shattering of dreams each and every time, because there truly is nothing of substance to back it up. There is nothing there to make us believe that it will stand for the things that we have always stood for, or that it will somehow promote the better interest, the greater interest, or the overarching interest of we the people. If we don't think about things rationally, logically, and realistically, then we are setting ourselves up for disappointment, mediocrity, but above all, failure. And that is not the way of the American people. That has never been our way. Never since the inception of this nation have we been complacent. Never have we been just overtly trusting of the auspices of government. In fact, the exact and polar opposite has been the case. We have always been rugged individualists that have sought to achieve of our own fruition and by our own ability. Unfortunately, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been incessantly, relentlessly, meticulously, and incrementally pushing us over the past 150 plus years ever further to the left, further taking away our own identity, further distancing and divorcing us from those great natural law tenets which by their nature are immutable, meaning they are just as applicable today as they were at the inception of this nation some 235 years ago, as God willing they will be some 235 years from today. But not if we abandon them. Not if we forget them, not if we just bow down and capitulate and collaborate with a cult of personality, thinking that by once again embracing the lesser of two evils, that we will somehow propel this nation back to a sense of purpose. For you see, each and every time we slide to the left, we never recover the footing that we lost. We never regain the captured territory, for lack of a better term. And that spells disaster each and every time. It literally places us on a wrong footing. It literally drives us further into a position of consternation, a position of chaos, a position that will ultimately lead us to destruction, depravity, and despair. We just cannot do that. But with respect to Palin, it's just so funny here. The problem with her is that she has now a problem that is an image-based problem. Remember that she had entitled her book Going Rogue. She had essentially carefully crafted an image of where she stood up to the traditional standard bearers of power. That is, she wanted to be perceived as one who was willing to stand up to the so-called establishment. And, of course, that is a line that was touted and rehashed over and over again to the point of ad nauseum all throughout the 2016 presidential election cycle. People erroneously went in front of the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to proclaim that Donald Trump was a political outsider, that he had no connection with the system of polity, and that he was a straight shooter and called things as they were. Yet the great weight of the evidence shows that nothing, absolutely nothing, could be further from the truth, and we are facing the just abysmal landscape of shattered dreams, of broken promises, and of misled people. You know, we have said it all along. It is our duty, our obligation, our responsibility to stand up for and proactively maintain and safeguard, promote, and advocate for our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Yet unfortunately it appears that the vast majority of Americans don't even want to know what those are. They want to just allow themselves to be whipped up into a raw state of emotional hysteria in which they shut down their logical faculties and capabilities, becoming willfully blind to the dangers that loom just around the corner. And just like Palin, we run the risk of completely tarnishing our own identity. In her case, she completely tarnished the image of being a rogue when she became one of the earliest and loudest shills for President-elect Donald J. Trump. I'm sorry, but there really is no other way to frame this situation other than I just have. And unfortunately, Sarah Palin's not alone in this. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have so aptly named not only the election cycle, but the outgoing year of 2016 as the election cycle of betrayal and the year of betrayal. Just as 2015 was the year of political correctness, 2016 was the year of betrayal. Let's pray that 2017 does not become the year of entrenched delusions. Because if we continue to delude ourselves that somehow Donald Trump will act with constraint, and somehow he will magically, overnight, with the stroke of a pen, become a God-fearing conservative, then we are really setting ourselves up for nothing less than complete abject frustration bitterness, and failure. But those are not the character traits that have driven this nation, or propelled this nation to such lofty heights in her relatively brief yet illustrious history. It is our rugged independence. It is our durability, our ability to overcome every hurdle, obstacle, and adversity that has ever been placed in our path. But the only way we can do that is to embrace our duties, obligations, but above all responsibilities in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. But everywhere we turn, people like Rush Limbaugh, people like Michael Weena Savage, people like Sean Hannity, people like Laura Inkamp, people like Little Orphan Annie Yap Yap Coulter Taylor the Floozy. You know, Coulter, she too began to realize that the great image that she had basically projected onto Trump at the time that she was going out to really push and plug hard for that book where she deified Trump, entitling it "In Trump We Trust," that he's not going to live up to it. And I remember that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, attacked her for her rather specious claim that she could not be held accountable for that. Yes, she can. And we are holding her accountable for that. Just as we will hold Mark Levin accountable for the things that he went out and okayed. Now, yes, it was to a much less degree with Levin. Levin was reluctant, but he still did it. And you cannot escape that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media will utilize each and every available opportunity to stereotype us all. With the negativity that is happening, with this outright ugliness that has become a hallmark of Trump. And I fear that that will be the ongoing hallmark of his entire administration, if we can even call it an administration once it assumes the mantle of power in these United States of America. Again, this is just one of those harsh, stark, simple realities that we cannot escape, but the Lion Branch Trumpidians in our midst are doing everything they can to continue their acute ostrich syndrome of shoving their heads up their posteriors as opposed to the sand, because they do not want to face the music. They do not want to admit that they made a grievous error. Now, you see, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, do not fault them for voting their conscience. We do not push for adherence to a tyranny of false unity. But we do go by this notion that we will hold everyone, including ourselves, accountable for our words, our deeds, and our actions. You see, that is the only way that a nation can remain free. That is the only way to properly utilize power and to restrain those charlatans, those hucksters, those carnival barkers and con artists and snake oil salesmen that are attempting to bamboozle us and to illicitly strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. You see, that is what our founding fathers would have expected us to do. And that is the way that you restore a nation to prosperity. Particularly when the nation, like that of these United States of America, are based on those immutable natural law tenets. You see, that is the greatness of America. That is what they don't understand. And so it's part of the reason why my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, and yours truly have taken such issue with that ridiculous platitude of "Make America Great Again." Because as we have stated over and over again, to the point of it being ad nauseum, it presupposes that America ever once ceased being great. No, America never has ceased being great. We are still governed by the supreme law of the land, battered and bruised though it may be. The Constitution still reigns supreme. And that is what we've got to be getting back to, yet that is not what the elitists, the current political powers that be, those who currently wield the reins of power, are looking to do. And sure, the Lion Branch Trumpidians who continue to congregate in their dark and cavernous Trumpidian tabernacle would have us believe that we have to give him 190 days, that we have to give him this grace period. No, we don't. Not when he is assuming the mantle of president before he has even sworn the oath of office. You see, the entire purpose of that oath of office is so important. It is to restrain the person who is about to assume the highest office in the land, to ensure that they adhere and abide by, in the strictest of terms, the clear and concise language contained within our shared United States Constitution. Again, this is something that is being ignored. This is something that, we're being fearmongers, or, we are being detached from reality when we bring up these concerns. But no, it is being realistic. It is understanding that these nefarious forces are out there and that there is a concerted effort coming from either side of the political aisle attempting to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And the minute that we give any ground on that is the minute that they will try and annihilate us. Make no mistake about it, folks, that is what they are driven to do. That is their end goal. They will not back down from that because they see a light at the end of the tunnel and they think that that means that their victory is within grasp. And it is unless we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, stand up to them and say, no, enough is enough. But with Sarah, what she did is she bought into the shallow, hollow, empty, and ultimately meaningless platitude of Make America Great Again. She didn't consider the past of Trump, and she went out of her way to attack the candidate who really did have the credentials of successfully standing up for the rights of the people. Folks, again, as my first officer Jeremy Grapington and I have so frequently reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, what we should be focused on is restoring the Constitution. Our primary and daily driving force should be to ensure that the Constitution is strictly adhered to at every level of government. Unfortunately, that's the exact and polar opposite of what this incoming administration, if we can even call it that, seeks to do. We've seen proposal after monstrous proposal of exponentially increasing the size, scope, and influence of the federal government. This isn't in line with the foundational image our founding fathers had for this nation, nor is it being implemented with the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in mind. It simply is not, and there's no way around this fact. I think one of the glaring problems that faces us currently is that we have allowed our attention spans to be reduced to that of mere sound bites. Think of that for a moment, folks. We pay attention long enough for bumper sticker slogans to be the breadth of our commitment to the political system. Sure, there are outliers, as there always is, but the vast majority of the people seem unwilling to pay attention to the greater problem. They've surrendered the task of thinking to others. It is for that reason that those who once proclaimed to be paragons of conservative value, who sold out to Trump, have lost more than mere credibility. They have lost the trust of the people. Of course, in the end, the best way to deal with this is to think for ourselves, to be rational, to be independent thinkers. We must refuse to fall victim to the charlatans who seek to disrupt our goal of restoring American prosperity. That's all there is to it. Palin is beginning to learn the hard way the price that she must pay for having danced to the tune of the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives. She was critical of Trump's push for the crony corporatist carrier deal, yet the carrier deal is but the tip of the iceberg. Trump's stubby thumbs have gone to the Twitter sphere to cause even greater damage to American corporations and defense contractors. He's essentially spreading pain and misery, which, to my mind, is hardly different than the tactics implemented by the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist and outgoing President Barack Hussein Obama. Yet, there's a logical explanation for why Trump's positions seem in line with those of the left. It's because he has been a leftist for the vast majority of his 70 years spent on God's green earth. That is what we tried to warn about for a year and 4 months now, folks. Nevertheless, the Lion Branch Trumpidians disregard the truth. The truth is too painful for them to accept, as they have projected their own self-identity and self-worth onto what they considered was a messianic figure. The end result of such mistaken thinking will always be disaster in the end. There is simply no way of escaping that harsh reality. But they want us to escape it. They want to continue to bamboozle us. They want to continue to foist their erroneous notions on us and to claim that we are somehow traitors if we don't just jump on board the Trump train. No thanks, I have no interest in seeing the dismantling of our federalist, constitutionally endowed representative republic. I have no interest of seeing the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, but above all oppression take root in the land of the free and the home of the brave. I will not put my name to such a movement because I am holistically opposed to the machinations and to the end goals of these charlatans. But what is so disconcerting and disheartening is that so many within the land of the free and the home of the brave have surrendered this, have abandoned it, and have sold their soul to the devil of political expediency. Seduced by victory and led astray by their own raw state of emotionalism that has been whipped up into a state of hysteria that they have forgotten how to think for themselves and that they do not consider the totality of the circumstances and therefore miss the unintended consequences that could plunge this nation into an untenable, unsustainable, destabilized situation for many generations to come. And I don't think that we should embrace that. I don't think that that should be our lot, our future, because that is certainly not the destiny of the American people. But the American people are going to have to wake up. They are going to have to begin thinking and acting for themselves again and stop looking to the government to be the end-all, be-all solution for the great plethora of problems that face us. When we go down that path, we are embracing the path of total collapse and defeatism. And I don't think that we can afford to do so, particularly when you consider that the United States is currently in the midst of an identity crisis at the same time that we are grappling with a litany of constitutional crises. None of us want to see America suffer. It's counterproductive to place America into a tenuous and unsustainable position. Yet with all that is occurring in current events, I fear we are headed in for a long and turbulent 4-year stretch. We have made the decision to place this man at the head of our nation, and now we must live with the consequences of this decision, both the good and the bad that coincide with it. Again, this is why it is so important that we examine our choices for president through a constitutional lens. It's the only way that we can ensure that our best interests are being protected. Now, I'm sure that many of our critics will jump up and down screaming that I have unrealistic expectations for the office of president. They're convinced that I'm not giving Trump a fair shake, or that I expect perfection or the perfect candidate. No, I don't expect the perfect president. But I do expect the president to follow the constraints found in the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. We should all expect this of him. America's strength comes from the tenets and principles that are contained within the Constitution. That's what has guided us for over 2 centuries, and it would be foolish to abandon that now. Yet, what we see from either side of the political aisle is this disturbing tendency to vilify the Constitution. They both are working relentlessly to further distance and divorce ourselves from the very attributes that made us great in the first place. How on earth could one claim that this is making America great again? Truth be told, America never ceased being great. Trump was using this phrase to bamboozle people. He wanted us to think that we aren't the nation and people that we have been for 235 plus years. This is part of the problem that I have with the man. He doesn't care about the Constitution. He even admitted as much himself. We can ill afford to go down this erroneous path. It will only spell trouble further down the road. I want to turn my attention back to this Trump-Russian intelligence issue for a moment again, folks. As I mentioned, Trump claims to have intelligence that casts doubt on the Russian hacking deal. I hate to say this, but anything he claims with regard to this is suspect. After he went forth and essentially asked the Russians to hack his political opponent's server during the campaign trail, he's just lacking credibility here. He's acting like the Russians aren't opportunistic thugs who seek chaos and instability. Yet when one examines the long history of that massive nation that at its height composed or constituted 1/6 of the Earth's surface, one finds that chaos has always been their interest and end goal. Their first czar of any prominence was Ivan the Terrible. He received the nickname of Terrible because of the chaos he used to gain power from the boyars who were the Russian nobility. When you have such a long history of utilizing chaos, it becomes second nature to embrace chaos in any age. Yet chaos is not what we embrace here in the United States. Rather, we embrace the natural law or the natural order of things. Thus, the approach of governance between Russia and the United States is simply incompatible. It always has been, and it always will be. You know, there's a specific incident from early Russian history that I think also applies to Trump. One of the things that Ivan the Terrible did to help consolidate power in his hands and his hands alone was to state that he was abandoning or abdicating the throne. This threw the Russian people into chaos because they didn't know how to live without an autocratic ruler. The fact that the ruler was shirking his duties and responsibilities made them think that the nation would fall apart. Thus, by bowing out of his responsibilities, Ivan the Terrible ensured that the Russian people would crawl to him with hat in hand to beg him to return. Trump has also demonstrated an alarming tendency to vanish when he doesn't like the way current events are impacting his image. Recall the way that he ducked out of a debate early during the primary process. I think this is a similar approach to what Ivan did all those centuries ago. In a sense, what Trump and Ivan did was act like narcissists. They were attempting to manipulate circumstances to their advantage, irrespective of the harm it would cause to the people they supposedly represented. That is the sort of chicanery we can ill afford to have come to fruition in the United States. If someone says something Trump doesn't like, or that seemingly insults him, he cannot simply go on a Twitter tantrum or say that he's not going to deal with things anymore. The reason behind this is that he is now in a position of serving the American people. I know that I've said it before, but Trump still hasn't figured out that he is supposed to serve us, not the other way around. Unfortunately, the way that our government thinks today is that we are there to be pawns for the ends of the government alone. Yet nothing, truly nothing, could be further from the truth. When we look at the near poetic language to the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, there can be no doubt as to who is really meant to be in charge of these United States. It's we the people. The politicians didn't create this government and nation. Moreover, this nation and government doesn't belong to the politicians. Unfortunately, we've allowed the government to become something that our founding fathers never originally intended it to become. Of course, this turn of events occurred because we kept repeatedly buying into the notion of the lesser of two evils. The premise behind this mistaken doctrine is that we would then regroup and correct or rectify the problems created by the lesser evil come next election. Yet, this has never been the case. We've just successively gone further and further to the left in incremental fashion and to the great detriment of the nation and the people. There's really no way around this fact, folks. It is the situation we have faced for far too long now. Yet, according to Town Hall, Trump held an impromptu press conference at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida on Saturday, just before kicking off his New Year Eve's party. During the conference, he attempted to address the claim that Russia interfered in the 2016 election with a series of hacks. Zeke Miller tweeted that Trump had said, quote, "I also know things that other people don't know, and so they cannot be sure of the situation." Well, if he's going to dangle that sort of information out before the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, I think he needs to verify it. Of course, rumor has it that he will provide this information on Tuesday. But you know what, folks? I'm not going to hold my breath on this being anything substantive or meaningful. Trump is just attempting to play mind games here, and that's what he's done all along. I get the sense that Trump merely sees this as a game. He, much like the Russians, loves to see what happens when he delves into chaos. Of course, it's not in the best interests of the American people. This is all a form of political kabuki theater, and it doesn't bode well for the future. I know that many of Trump's ardent supporters say that we have to give him 190 days before we can start judging him. Yet, by his very actions, he has assumed the mantle of de facto president already. To my mind, this is an exceedingly dangerous turn of events. The man has not sworn the oath of office yet, which means that, at least to his mind, he can operate outside the proper scope and boundaries and applications of government as mandated by the clear and concise language within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. The problem with treating these sorts of national security threats as some sort of a game is that it disregards the fact that people's lives and livelihoods hang in the balance. Trump will be arguably the most powerful man in the world, and he treats this as though it's another one of his reality television programs. That is certainly not the way to run a country. It's also why we have always said that the United States cannot be run as a business. Our rights are non-negotiable, yet Trump still operates under the delusion that everything is up for negotiation. Recall that he had said this during the campaign trail, and that seems to be the position he is continuing to adhere to as we draw ever closer to his inauguration. Now, according to Keith Koffler at the Washington Examiner, President-elect Trump has said that he will release this alleged new information either Tuesday or Wednesday. This is almost like a teaser that's used in television or so-called professional wrestling. I'm tired of him acting like the American people are a bunch of dunces. Yet, in his mind, that's exactly who and what we are. It's baffling to me as to how anyone could ever conclude that Trump is some sort of an outsider who wasn't involved in politics or the political system. He has been manipulating the process for over 3 decades. Trump's reasoning for being so cryptic about this new information is that he just wanted us to be sure, because the charges are pretty serious. In other words, he's essentially saying that our intelligence community doesn't know what the hell it's talking about or doing. I find this to be pretty insulting to those brave men and women who have made the national security of these United States their top priority. Yet, insulting is what Trump seems to be best at, and he shows no signs of backing down from this grotesque character trait. Thus, we are strung along and placed into an uncomfortable situation. This all reminds me of what that great founding father Samuel Adams said we needed to be in order for our republic to be strong and vibrant. He said that we must be a virtuous people. Again, that falls down the lines of holding ourselves and others accountable. Accountability seems to be an anathema in modern America. This is because the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have worked non-stop to try and pass the buck. They don't want people to feel accountable for themselves, because that means those people will not so willingly surrender to their dark and twisted machinations. Self-responsibility and accountability are still the central pillars of a free society, and we must get back to that way of thinking. Unfortunately, Trump doesn't seem to want to be held accountable for his own words, deeds, and actions. I see this as being no different than outgoing President Barack Hussein Obama. Folks, I really don't see that much of a difference between the two men. The duty of preserving and maintaining our representative republic is on our shoulders, and has always fallen to the people. Our founding fathers designed our government to operate in such a fashion. Thus, we simply cannot afford to relinquish this duty, obligation, and above all, responsibility. When we turn to the government to be the be-all, end-all solution to the problems we face, we merely deepen the hole that we've already dug for ourselves. Again, I do not believe that this would be in our best interest, particularly in the long haul. Yet, the bread and circuses continue at the top level. People have deluded themselves into thinking we've somehow achieved a great victory simply by halting Hillary Clinton. That's only part of the picture. The other part is correcting the disastrous policy positions that have harmed this nation over the past 8 years and longer. Unfortunately, I don't foresee this getting better in the foreseeable future. Trump simply isn't interested in the practicable and real-world solutions that will foster in a new age of American prosperity. Megan Kerr at the New Americana has put out a piece where she lambasted the left for having the art of denying reality. It's true that this is something that comes up with the left repeatedly. Yet, when we look at those who bow at the altar of Trump, we see that this sort of mentality simply isn't limited to the left. The right is divided, and they're acting as though this isn't the case anymore. Look, the divisions will continue so long as Trump fails to adhere to the Constitution. We already know Trump won't adhere to the Constitution because he's acting as though he's already the President of the United States. He's ignoring the fact that he's supposed to swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution to the best of his ability before he does anything that would be considered the responsibility of the Chief Executive of the United States. When this is brought up, the Trumpidians simply bat it aside as unimportant or even as being good for the nation. So we're going to allow Trump to break the rules because he's Trump? This is nothing more than a rehash of Yeah But Trump all over again. At some point, This argument is going to have to lose steam, just as Obama's blaming Bush for every shortcoming lost steam. But we are still on this path. We are still driving this home because we have allowed ourselves to become so deluded. We have allowed this to become the new norm for American politics. And that's disruptive. It is foolhardy. It is going to lead to a plethora of unintended consequences. And you know what? Irrespective of whether what Trump is doing is with the best intentions or not, that old adage goes that the road to hell is paved in good intentions. We have to be cognizant and wary of that. We have to be willing to stand up against that, because that is just one of those dark, inevitable truths that is still facing us as I sit here speaking into this microphone, conveying this message unto you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members. I think the reason that we see all of this developing within the ranks of the right is that the term conservative has been bastardized again. I know that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning about the dangers of the dark and twisted game of semantics dating back to our premiere episode of September 11th of 2015. Yet this is exactly the sort of the trap that the dark and twisted game of semantics creates. People have allowed themselves to go along with it because they don't want to delve deeper into what is actually happening. They've fallen into a raw state of emotional hysteria and simply cannot break themselves free of the miasma of dangerous group think. We know that we're better than this, but we've allowed ourselves to be led astray. We want to believe that this won't have drastic and far-reaching consequences and impacts for our nation. Perhaps the most erroneous line of thought I've seen espoused by those who have gone all in for Trump is that we need to have the same kind of authoritarian rule that Obama had in order to correct the damage that Obama has done to our nation at large. This is the same thinking advocated for and adhered to by Roger Nash Baldwin, the co-founder of the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU. He argued that we have to use the Constitution in order to destroy the Constitution. Both lines of thought are wrong, and both lines of thoughts are highly dangerous. The tragic reality is we have fallen into the same contradictory mindset that the left has. The only thing that makes this even worse is that we don't realize that it is what we've done. We're being willfully blind to the dangerous turn of events that is unfurling all around us. That is pure delusion on our part. I always like to think that the right would be the side of logic, but now I'm being forced to reconsider my thoughts in regards to this. We've become as blind as Obama's cult of personality was back in 2008 and 2012. We will have to regroup. But I don't see that happening at any point in the near future. The Trumpists are still intoxicated on their victory. They're pressing down on the accelerator as the car careens towards a bend in the road at breakneck speeds. I think what America needs right now is to take a step back from all the things that are happening and really try to prioritize what will help us regain a solid footing. We've been enamored with false prophets, for lack of a better term, for far too long now. Unless and until we begin to realize just how much of a danger our liberties are in, we won't be able to overcome the problems that stand in our way. Americans have always been problem solvers. That is what is an inherent part of our national character, heritage, spirit, and identity. It has driven us to the lofty heights we managed to achieve in our relatively brief yet illustrious history. But somewhere along the way we lost sight of this fact. We have become so caught up in merely surviving that we don't even recognize the dangers in front of us anymore. It's not that I think we cannot overcome the steep obstacles that have been placed in our path. I just don't think we've become alert to the fact that these obstacles cannot be overcome with more of the same. Now, we thought, perhaps, some of us, that by electing Trump, that we would be departing from the status quo in politics. Yet we've attempted to warn for over a year now that Trump simply isn't who he claims to be. I wonder what it will take for his acolytes to fully realize this. There is some promise, however, that they're beginning to, in that Michael Savage and Sarah Palin are starting to have second thoughts with the man they've so vehemently supported throughout the electoral process. But in a way, it seems like too little too late. In my mind, one of the perfect examples that Trump isn't going to change his ways came from the tweet that he put out on New Year's Eve. He essentially attacked those who find problems with him in a childish and, dare I say, juvenile way. Again, the President of the United States of America is supposed to represent all Americans, even those Americans who disagree with him. However, this is something that I don't think Trump has realized yet. He has all the hallmarks of an out-of-control bully who doesn't give a damn about anybody but himself. That is just par for the course with Donald Trump. He has always been that way, and it's not going to change. The actual tweet in question read as follows: Happy New Year to all, including to my many enemies and those who have fought me and lost so badly they just don't know what to do. Love. Wrong, Trump. I know what to do. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have always known what to do. It is you who fails to understand how a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic is supposed to work. You don't care to learn either. And to my mind, this is what makes you such a detriment to our free system of government. We need to have statesmen running this country, not a juvenile delinquent who never outgrew his high school phase. Then again, the reason that Trump was sent to a military prep school was because he didn't care about anyone but himself, and he was a juvenile delinquent. Trumpidians continue to ignore the harsh facts of reality that are right in front of their noses about him and about what he stands for. Back on December 30th, Caitlin Schallhorn at the Blaze penned a piece on a U.S. government ethics director approving controversial tweets about the Orange God King. Again, it seems that the Twitter sphere is leading to even further chaos and instability at the helm of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. Apparently, director Walter M. Schwab approved tweets that sang the praises of total divestiture. This was in conjunction with Trump's supposed efforts to alleviate conflicts of interest with his businesses. Again, folks, this is all a show. It's the government acting in a rogue and illegitimate fashion. I don't think it is in our best interest for a governmental agency to be engaging in this sort of chicanery. It smacks of a conflict of interest in and of itself. That's the problem. We're becoming no different than the banana republics we used to resist. In a sense, we're starting to think of the corruption that plagues the annals of government as cute and harmless. But, as always, nothing could be further from the truth. We're sacrificing any modicum of credibility that we once had, and to me, that's a travesty. But there's another interesting thing to note with all of this, and particularly the Russian aspect, and that is that former Ambassador John Bolton has split with Trump on retaliation for Russian hacking. Bolton thinks we should hold Russia accountable for any attempts they've made to destabilize the position of the United States in the world. That's the logical position that any red-blooded American patriot should assume. However, I find this a bit odd, seeing as Bolton has been a loud acolyte of Trump. Again, it makes me wonder when the Trump acolytes will awaken to the reality of who the man they support really is. Russia is not our friend, they never have been, and I seriously doubt that they ever will be. These are the hard facts of life that we have to awaken to. We have to be prepared to do whatever is necessary to secure the security and future well-being of our nation without sacrificing our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Yet when I look at the incoming administration, I am not filled with a sense of hope. In fact, I'm filled with anything but a sense of hope. It's because Trump doesn't seem to take seriously the problems that are facing this nation. He'd rather just keep attacking those who disagreed with him as if that's what is truly needed to place this nation back onto the path to prosperity. I don't know why people have convinced themselves that he truly cares about the plight of the American citizen. He pays lip service to it, sure, but his actions speak far louder than his words do, and there's nothing that he said that I can believe. I can't believe him because he's consistently inconsistent, and that's a problem that has followed him throughout his entire time in the public spotlight. He seems to think we're stupid, and that's how he's always approached the public. Then there's this push with Sprint to say that he's preserved another 5,000 jobs, or however many he claims now. It has all the trappings of another crony corporatist deal of the worst sort. I thought that one of the reasons that conservatives were so angry with Obama was that the government had assumed the role of choosing winners and losers in the private sector. We said then that it was an impermissible entanglement of government within the private sector, but now, because Trump proclaims himself to be a conservative, we are to think that this same type of interference is good? Pardon me, but again, when did it become hip to be hip with hypocrisy? When did it become cool to be a hypocrite? Hypocrisy is one of those things that has been alienating huge swaths of the American electorate for far too long now. The political class has the ability to say anything at any given time, given the particular audience which they happen to be speaking in front of at that precise moment in time. Trump has already shown that he follows this same course of conduct. Recall what he said in response to those followers who were chanting, "Lock her up," shortly after he won the election. He said, "That sounds good during the election, but now we don't care." Don't we? Was that not one of the tenets that he ran on? I surely thought it was. His inconsistent positions with respect to the multitude of campaign promises he made all throughout the election continue to cause doubt with me. Thus, when he seems to have such an affinity for Russia, but then at the same time says, "Let there be a new arms race," I just have to wonder what the hell he's thinking. What's become readily apparent to me is that the man simply doesn't think. He just speaks and considers thinking as a mere afterthought, if at all. This is not the sort of leadership that will help propel the United States back to prosperity. It's the type of thinking that will further weaken our position overall. I wish this weren't the case. I wish there was a reason I could think of in order to be happy about Trump assuming the reins of political power in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, yet there is nothing at all whatsoever that comes to mind. Speaking of the whole Russia and cybersecurity issue, back on December 30th, John Street at The Blaze did a piece covering some claims that Matt Drudge, the William Randolph Hearst of the internet, made. Apparently, Drudge, who had been a shill for Trump throughout the entire primary process and campaign, claimed that the government had been hacking his internet servers. Specifically, he claimed that the government was engaging in denial or directed denial of service attacks, DDoS attacks. What that means is that they were allegedly overwhelming his servers with repeated pings or connections to his server so that others simply could not access the site. What I find interesting about this is that's not the sort of hacking that the government does. Maybe it was the Russians, or maybe it was WikiLeaks. While I don't support private web servers being hacked like this, it's hard for me to feel any sympathy for Drudge. Remember that Drudge had rigged all of the polls on his page to have Trump win by large margins, no matter how abysmal his performance had been during the preceding debates. So I guess this is me thinking that karma had a way of getting back at Drudge, who utilized some rather seedy strategies during the election. Truth be told, I believe this man beclowned himself. And that makes it very difficult for me to sympathize with him in any form or fashion. The other interesting aspect about this Drudge story is that he hasn't provided any evidence which corroborates his claims. Rather, it appears as though he's just attempting to sensationalize this news in order to gain more clicks. In that sense, he's become a bit of a showboater like Trump. That's one of the things that I can't stand about Trump, and I hate to see that this is something that's becoming a new established norm in the United States. Nevertheless, if it is true that the government hacked his servers, then that is something to be concerned about. Yet I won't believe the veracity of the story until there is some solid evidence proving his rather outlandish claims. We in the United States must be able to verify these things. That's what we are tasked to do in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. It's also the reason why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, tell you not simply to take what we say at face value. Look into these things, research it yourself, and thereby empower yourselves. With that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Folks, on behalf of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, I, as your Captain Randy Wright, want to wish you all a very happy new year. May it bring you prosperity in your personal lives. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions, please feel free to leave them here at the comment section on our YouTube page or on our Google Plus page or even on our Facebook page. On top of this, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with our Twitter handle of @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. There you will find our departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my First Officer Jeremy Grapenton, the Blogspot account where I am slowly getting back to putting up the alternative links for the shows, as well as audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program. And then there's the Cafe Press account. At the Cafe Press account, we have all sorts of goodies at reasonable prices, ranging from our mugs, hats, t-shirts, drinking glasses, watches, laptop sleeves, tote bags, phone protectors, you name it, we have it, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence logo, our first-class passenger logo, or the two Uplifting America logos. Go ahead and take a peek at that, folks, and give us a bit of support. Thank you again for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer, and Happy New Year's. We will see you again next time. Please do take care.